Hey, good news for everybody who isn't an Eagles fan, because this offseason, Philadelphia lost the two most expensive pass rushers in free agency. They traded away their stud safety. They lost their right guard in free agency, their starting cornerback. Everybody else has a chance now. Maybe not so much. They still have the best young roster in the NFL and come in number one in my power rankings. I think I speak for 31 NFL fan bases when I say, Howie Roseman, I think you can off. Welcome in, everybody, to the not-so-surprising reveal of our number one team in these power rankings for this offseason deep dive series. We're going a little bit out of order here. The surprise would have been ruined anyway if we did our number two team, which is obviously the Ravens at this point. We would have known who number one was anyway, and we've got a football game tomorrow. So we're going to do the Eagles first here, and then Ravens fans, I will have your deep dive, hopefully Friday evening, so you'll have time to consume that before their game on Sunday. Obviously, this Eagles team is locked and loaded, looking for a repeat, looking to avoid that Super Bowl hangover. There are some questions here with this team, but for the most part, let's be honest, Eagles fans, this is a celebration for you. This team is absolutely absurd and undoubtedly deserves to be the number one team in these power rankings. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So in this series, we go through every position group, including the coaching staff, and we start each of those chapters by taking a look at their offseason changes and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same at that spot. And we'll start by talking about this Eagles coaching staff. And this is going to be one of those few areas of question marks for this Eagles team, as they lose Kellen Moore, their offensive coordinator, to go be the Saints head coach here. And they're going to promote internally here with Kevin Patullo. I do have to say downgraded there because I do think highly of Kellen Moore and the job he did last year. But the Eagles are obviously hoping that this isn't going to be a repeat of the 2023 season where they kind of botched the offensive coordinator transition following losing Shane Steichen. So let's discuss this coaching staff in depth. And this is probably where I will piss off Eagles fans a little bit, because on the graphic there, you can already see I have Nick Siriani ranked as the 21st head coach in the NFL, despite just winning the Super Bowl. And look, I've come around on Siriani a little bit. I think he does build a really tough competitive culture here in Philadelphia. And when you look at the overall coaching culture grade for the Eagles, it is pretty damn good there, right? It ranks 6th to 13th. But even then, look back at what we said coming off the 2023 season. This locker room was spiraling and had one of the most confusing cultures in the league. So we are just a year removed from Nick Siriani as the head coach when he didn't nail his coordinator hires, kind of botching this whole thing. Obviously, he gets it right last season, though. And, with that Super Bowl run and seeing this team really rally behind him as the leader of this team, as that CEO mentality. And I can't hate on a good Italian man too much here. I do give him some credit for being one of those good CEO-style coaches, but I also, there's only so much of the credit pie to go around here. When I look around the league and see other brilliant play callers and other CEO-style coaches that I think of even more highly than Nick Siriani, it's just hard for me to rank him that high, even though his team did win the Super Bowl last year. Now, if he can nail this transition again with this offensive coordinator change, I think that will go a long ways towards me giving him more benefit of the doubt that he can have more sustained success over time here. And let's be honest, it's going to be hard for any of this to fall apart with the job Howie Roseman has done as the general manager here, building the premium elite roster in the NFL. But again, we did see in 2023, Nick Siriani did botch the offensive coordinator situation, and he himself, despite having an offensive background, has not proven to be someone that can take command and be the play caller here, even if the offense is going to stay designed under his overall vision. But yeah, if he can nail this hire, this promotion of Kevin Patullo, we will probably see Nick Siriani get a little bit more credit from me into the future. But let's talk about Kevin Patullo and the offensive coaching here in Philadelphia. They're going with the internal promotion here. He has been here in Philadelphia for the last 4 seasons and was with Nick Siriani for 3 years before that in Philadelphia. So there is a strong connection there between these two guys. And Patullo's been around. He has been coaching in the NFL, going way back to coaching under Chan Gailey for a long time in the NFL in 3 different locations. He started in 2008, so almost 20 years ago. And that is pretty impressive considering he's just 44 years old. So in his mid-20s, he was an assistant coach in the NFL under Chan Gailey there in Kansas City. He actually would have just missed Nick Siriani, who went to Kansas City the next year under Todd Haley. But Kevin Patullo goes to follow Chan Gailey in 3 different spots. After Kansas City, he follows him to Buffalo and then to the New York Jets in the mid-2010s. So he's been around. He's learned a lot of different NFL offenses, a little bit more old school Chan Gailey stuff earlier in his career, and then some more of these modern pro spread style offenses under Frank Reich, who is a kind of Andy Reid disciple there. And then, of course, kind of being here in the Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, Kellen Moore era as well. I think you would say his resume is that of a sort of modern pro spread scheme. However, what I fully anticipate the Eagles are going to do here, and part of why I just think this transition away from an offensive coordinator leaving is going to go better than it did in 2023, is that they've really found an identity that works for this offense and Jalen Hurts that I just don't think they're going to really mess with at this point. After last year, especially, Kellen Moore tried to kind of open up the passing game a little bit more, be a little bit more pro style, and it just didn't work. I feel like Nick Sirianni with Kevin Patullo here, they've now kind of undergone that experience a couple times where they just kind of dial things back a little bit, run more of a college style, spread style offense, and things work much better with an elite offensive line and a run game and leaning into Hurts's legs and all that stuff. So I don't expect any form of scheme change. I think that's exactly why they went with the internal promotion. And the hope really is just that Kevin Patullo is good at pushing the right buttons at the right time. And of course, like being the offensive coordinator here. So as far as the coaching rankings here for Philadelphia, it's not, they certainly aren't horrible. They come in that tier that ranks 22nd to 30th for pass game coaching and 19th to 27th for run game coaching. It's just more of that kind of unproven, let's see how it goes category for offensive coaching. But the beauty here is if you are like me and maybe you are a little bit more skeptical of just how good Nick Sirianni is as a head coach, and you're going to have some question marks about the offensive coordination here, they do have Vic Fangio, who is absolutely, I think, in that conversation, probably with like Steve Spagnuolo and Brian Flores, in my opinion, at this point in time, for who the best defensive coach in the NFL is. And it feels like he's kind of just settling down here in Philadelphia. Like, he's been around. He was an assistant coach / advisor in 2022, then he did the Miami thing, and then he comes back here as the defensive coordinator. So there's some familiarity there, but to start the season, they were pretty good defensively, but really once the year went on, as we tend to see with amazing defensive coordinators, he really settled in, got everybody in the right position for his scheme, and figured out exactly what they wanted to do, and they didn't look back. This became one of those just dominant championship caliber defenses. Again, you look back on the full course of the season, and they're not going to compare to like those Legion of Boom defenses or the Denver no-fly zone or Saxonville or anything like that, because it did take them some time to get there. But it certainly felt like the last 8 weeks of the season, that was really the level they were playing at, as bar none the best defense in the league. And now Vic back for his second straight year now. And now really this is the first time Vic gets that continuity with this Eagles team where things can start to be pretty damn scary, where they can really lock in here with Vic. And we'll see how long he wants to coach. He just turned 67, but seems to be having a good time here in Philadelphia. It's a great fit. So yeah, their defensive coach rankings are just about as good as they get. They come in tied for first for pass defense coaching, and then just a tick below that for run defense coaching, where they rank 5th to 9th. And I would say if we see one more year of Vic Fangio basically doing what he did in the second half of last season, Those are going to be elite of the elite in terms of our coaching rankings for next year's series, assuming he wants to come back at age 68. And like I said, you're going to have a pretty strong case that this is the best defensive coach in the NFL. And frankly, as we kind of shift towards the scheme conversation with this defense, that's not a huge surprise. I mean, has there been a deep dive yet out of 30 so far that we haven't said the words Fangio in? This is the really grandfather of today's defensive meta. And quick, stupid sidebar, but speaking of Godfather, does this Eagles coaching staff not read like the next installment of the Godfather series with Fangio and Siriani and Patullo? Gotta love the name structure here, but yeah, I mean, Vic has really inspired the rest of the league with his split safety, kind of quarters heavy off zone match style system. We talk so much about this exact defensive scheme and then the different variations of it with kind of the Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans deviation of it that tends to be more of that 4-2 wide 9 style front, but a lot of the similar coverage structures on the back end. And then the Mike McDonald system that I would say is a little bit more of a blitz heavy variation of the Vic Fangio system. Whereas Vic's is a little bit more vanilla, frankly, and not in a bad way. Like, Vic does not overcomplicate things, where as long as things are working, Vic would love to live in that world as the Eagles did last year, where they're going to be bottom 3 in blitz rate, and they were last year. They're going to run that base 2-4 nickel front, where the Eagles ran the third most nickel in the league last year, just over 80% of the time. And then they're really only going to run 4 coverages for the most part. And that's going to be, of course, cover 3. Everybody runs a lot of cover 3. We talked about this in the Lions deep dive, where 31 out of 32 NFL teams, their most run zone coverage was cover 3 last year. The Eagles were no different. They ran 38% of the time. They ran cover 3. And then almost exactly down the board with the Eagles last year, between 17 and 18% of the time, they ran cover 1, so Vic will mix in man coverage. That's something that I think really separates him from where a lot of his disciples failed. You know, we've seen Brandon Staley and Joe Barry and Ed Donatel go out of this system and really fail. Well, Vic understands, like, yeah, you can't always be super passive. Like, you still have to play physical press man coverage at times. So Vic will run that when appropriate. And then the main idea with this defense is that pre-snap too high structure. So the other 2 main coverages are going to be cover 6 and cover 4. So he's going to run those really 4 different coverages and then come out with that same pre-snap too high safety look that after the snap, they can really rotate in any direction. And the idea with that is, number one, you're going to prevent big plays, have that kind of cloud over the offense where you do have guys deeper and just preventing explosive plays is kind of like the heartbeat of a Vic Fangio defense. But also, causing confusion for the offense where, you're not really able to walk up to the line of scrimmage and know what they're going to run, because after the snap, they could rotate into any of those 4 styles of coverages. So instead of kind of coming up and causing confusion pre-snap, like a lot of defenses do, you're not going to cause pre-snap confusion. It's that post-snap confusion that adds multiplicity and depth to this defense. So that's a core part of why it works. But also, like, it takes an excellent teacher of this system in Vic Fangio to make sure that everybody on the secondary is on the same page, because if you're going to run a lot of quarters and cover 6, like, communication has to be at a premium, and an understanding of that system has to be at a premium. And I think keeping things a little bit more simple helps coach this defense. But I think we've also seen that, like, you have to have the right roster talent to run this system too. You have to have a defensive line that can win with 4, and Vic is also very good at running twists and games up front. He doesn't depend on it, but he's not going to just line you up and ask guys to win one-on-one. He's going to do other things schematically to help those guys on ET and TE stunts to create some of those advantages up front for those guys. But I think one other area of this defensive structure that has quietly become really important as the league really has leaned more into running at the teeth of so many of these nickel Fangio style defenses is to have a big nickel back that can really contribute to the run and be an extension of your linebacker core at times has actually proved to be really, really important. We've talked about this with some of those like big safety nickels, guys like Kyle Hamilton, for example. We saw this exact thing play out with Jalen Ramsey playing that big nickel in Brandon Staley's version of this defense. That was certainly critical for them. But that's Cooper DeJean here, to have that guy that, hey, coming out, there was a debate. Is he a safety? Is he a nickel? Is he an outside corner? Ultimately, the answer is yes, all of those things. But to have a full-sized slot corner that can legitimately get off blocks and fill the run, it's really important in a league that has become more of a run-heavy league to have that guy that can do that out of a base nickel defense. So your 4-2 is kind of like a 4-2.5 style front. And for the league to let the Eagles get Cooper DeJean in the second round was really, I think, just the cherry on top. And I don't think it was a coincidence that once he came back and really began able to play, because he entered the season hurt, I don't think it's a coincidence that right around that week 7-ish mark, that's when this defense really filled in, like we described as that elite defense down the stretch. So there's your Vic Fangio system. The Eagles are in very good hands with him on this side of the ball. Whereas I do just personally have some more questions to see how this is going to play out under Nick Siriani with the offensive coordinator. But I'm more optimistic that they have an identity here that they're going to lean into, that they've really discovered over the last couple of years as they've kind of had their ebbs and flows, their ups and downs. I feel stronger that transition is going to be just fine with Kevin Patullo. But let's next get into the glaze fest of the Philadelphia Eagles roster. But before we do that, though, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy. You got about 24 hours left, roughly, depending on when this video gets up here, to do your best ball mania competitions. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Best ball is super underrated. For anybody that likes a fantasy draft and gets a kick out of that and wants to be able to compete for some money, Best ball is all about the draft. You do that, you do it, it's set it and forget it. And it's just like all your other leagues. You're competing against 11 other members that drafted along with you. But Underdog will pick your best lineup for you every single week. There's no waivers. There's no cuts and trades. It is all about who you drafted. They will play your best lineup every week based on who the best performer was. And you're competing for massive cash prizes as well. And then with the season beginning, you can get into your pick'em contest there as well. Eagles fans, do you think Saquon Barkley can get 0 rushing yards tomorrow? Because Underdog has a free gimme pick for your pick'em lineups on that game tomorrow night. Higher or lower, 0 yards on Saquon Barkley. But their pick'em contests are awesome. It just helps increase your interest in any given football game or baseball game for that matter, if you're still watching baseball. But you also get the opportunity for massive cash winnings there. So if you sign up right now using code TFG, you will get a bonus match and support my channel in the process. And good luck. All right. Let's begin this roster breakdown with probably the most polarizing conversation of it all, with the quarterback room and Jalen Hurts. First things first, we do have to look at their offseason changes at quarterback. They did actually see some changes, so they're saying goodbye to Kenny Pickett, who's taking a tour around the league right now, getting traded, as is Sam Howell. So changing of the guards with backup quarterbacks there. And then they did draft Kyle McCord, one of my favorite sleeper QBs in this draft, in the 6th round. And they ended up retaining him on the practice squad there. But staying neutral at quarterback, of course, with Jalen Hurts as the starter here, staying put. And Tanner McKee, for that matter, once he can get back from a broken thumb as presumably their QB2. But at this point, there's really no easy way for me to discuss Jalen Hurts as someone that is just lower on him and his game. With him winning that Super Bowl, Eagles fans have been quite loud and frankly aggressive to call you crazy if you don't put Jalen Hurts as a top 5, top 6 quarterback. But I don't care about that. I'm not going to be bullied into, lying about what I'm seeing with Jalen Hurts or having a dishonest discussion about what I see when I watch him play. I'm just going to give my honest opinion about who I think Jalen Hurts is as a quarterback, what I see when I watch him play. And if Eagles fans want to bombard me in the comments and take shots on me on Twitter, that's fine. I'm just being honest here about the quarterback I see here in Philadelphia. And that is a good quarterback. I have Jalen Hurts as my 12th overall QB in the league, not 5th, 6th, 7th, or anything like that. And I have him as a tier 3 quarterback, which I'm really happy with and frankly proud of the quarterback tiers that I have established over the years on this channel. And a tier 3 QB for me, by definition, is a good quarterback worth paying that in an ideal situation is going to put you in a position to win a Super Bowl. And yeah, I would say having the best offensive line, a top 2 group of pass catchers, the best running back in the league, and the best defense in the league is pretty close to an ideal situation that you can win a Super Bowl with. And that's what we saw last year. Jalen Hurts played well, and the Eagles win the Super Bowl. That doesn't mean I'm going to rank him as the 5th or 6th best QB in the league. But even if I won't go quite as far as Eagles fans want me to as far as where I rank Jalen Hurts, my opinion on him has risen. I think he really did a good job settling back down last year as this tier 3 good quarterback and playing well enough that the Eagles could go on a Super Bowl run. Whereas there was a point in time roughly a year ago that I questioned if Jalen Hurts was trending towards even being a tier 3 QB. And I made a video about it, a video that frankly aged horribly. But I'll stand by what I made in that video. And while literally right after I posted that video, which was the Eagles bye week, week 5, we were assessing weeks 1 through 4 and that 2023 season. While they immediately turned things around and the video did quote unquote age like milk, it doesn't change history and where we were at that point in time. So weeks 1 through 4, when they were going with that idea of putting more on Dak's plate, and the offense clearly resembled what we see more with like Dak Prescott in Dallas, being a little bit more of your typical example of a pro style offense, the Eagles weeks 1 through 4 not only were 2-2 as a team, but in the first month of the season, they passed the ball a lot more. Jalen Hurts attempted 33 passes per game. And as a result, he had 4 big-time throws to 11 turnover-worthy plays, 7 yards per attempt, and a PFF passing grade of 51.7. Okay? I make the video. I'm critical. I'm saying, I don't know. This thing's not going in the right direction. They hit the week 5 bye week. They come out of that and completely change course. They throw the ball 35% less, going from 33 attempts per game down to 22 attempts per game. They lean into the run game. They revert very much back to more of that spread style offense where Hurts has played his best football. And Jalen Hurts goes from 7 yards per attempt up to 8.4 yards per attempt. We mentioned that horrible big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio completely flips on his head. He ends up finishing week 6 onward all the way through the Super Bowl with 18 big-time throws to 8 turnover-worthy plays. That 51.7 PFF passing grade from the first month of the season skyrockets to 78.2. So I really think he and the Eagles did an excellent job after those struggles for the first month of the season where it just was not working, putting more of the passing game on Jalen Hurts' plate, changing course and honing in on this team's strengths and Jalen Hurts' strengths as well. Saying, look, we've literally got the best offensive line in the league, the best running back in the league, the best pass catchers in the league, including bringing back a lot of those QB run spread style concepts and leaning into Hurts' abilities with his legs much more. And let's peel back a lot of the passing game, a lot of the stuff that they tried to install early, and simplify things. Go back to feeding the ball to A.J. Brown, really just running the 3 routes that he's elite at, digs, slants, and go balls. Let's have a great run game, force teams into single high where they have to stop the run. And with those single high looks, if you get one-on-one with Jalen Hurts on the outside, Jalen, take a shot to him. Give him a chance. If they shade the coverage towards A.J. Brown, don't worry. They're going to buy you a clean pocket with that best offensive line in the league. Take a look at that horrible number 2 wide receiver they've got there named Devonta Smith, usually running a corner route or a hitch on that second read. And if he's covered, just take off and then either make something happen outside the pocket with your legs, with your arm, where Hurts does have good creative instincts in those situations. But most importantly, if there's nothing there, no problem. Just don't turn the ball over in the way that Jalen was in the first month of the season. And if they end up having to punt the ball over to the best defense in the league to take care of business and get the ball back for this offense and just do it all over again, no problem. What we can't have is you chucking the ball into double coverage and making bad reads, throwing the ball into harm's way. So Hurts does deserve credit really for mid-season settling back down after, frankly, a brutal start to the season and coming off the heels of a rough 2023 as well. He deserves credit for settling back down, being exactly what this team needed from him, leaning into his excellent accuracy, not missing throws, not turning the ball over, using his legs more, leaning into those legitimate strengths that he does have as a quarterback that can make him a good tier 3 quarterback. But when I see pretty much everyone out there now placing Hurts as anywhere from a top 5 to 7 QB in the league, I just can't get there. As someone who puts a lot of weight in evaluating the tape, I just can't sit here and give him credit for something that he just hasn't shown on tape, in my opinion. Every Sunday, I see about a dozen other players play the quarterback position at a higher level in regards to processing defenses, going through progressions, throwing with anticipation, as well as displaying that elite pocket feel that so many of the game's great quarterbacks have to navigate pressure and not bail out of clean pockets, which is still something that Jalen Hurts does quite a bit. And just overall arm talent as well. I just refuse to believe that if you put a handful, roughly about a dozen other QBs into Jalen Hurts' position with the best offensive line, the best running back, the first or second best group of pass catchers in the league, and the best defense in the league, I refuse to believe that there aren't a good handful of other players that wouldn't also win a Super Bowl in that situation. And that's just how I watch and think about the sport. And Eagles fans will say, wah, coulda, shoulda, woulda. That's all hypothetical. You can't just pretend that other QBs would do what we have seen Jalen Hurts do in this incredible infrastructure. Well, I would raise that point and argue back that it's also entirely hypothetical to just imagine that Jalen Hurts is doing so many of the other high-level quarterback things that other QBs in far worse surrounding circumstances have actually shown on tape. I think the leap of saying Jalen Hurts is putting top 5 QB tape out there is a much larger hypothetical leap than to just say, oh yeah, if you took Justin Herbert or Matthew Stafford or CJ Stroud or all the other QBs that I do have ranked over Jalen Hurts, put them on this Eagles team, yeah, they also would have won the Super Bowl last year. And by the way, Hurts did play well in the Super Bowl. He deserves credit for that. And the week before that, when his team was boat racing these other teams like Washington and Kansas City, gave him huge leads early on, where he was able to stick with the script and not have to press as a passer. But let's also not act like he was perfect. I mean, he was horrible against Green Bay in that first game. They were lucky to escape with that performance. And he wasn't good the next week in the snow against the Rams either, where they almost lost. So it bothers me too when people use the argument of like, well, Jalen Hurts doesn't have bad performances in the playoffs and that's why he's a top 5 QB. It's like, no, literally half of his playoff games this year when they did win the Super Bowl stunk. And hello, anybody go watch what he looked like against Tampa Bay last season. So don't give me this idea that Jalen Hurts doesn't have stinkers in the playoffs. It's just they've either lost like last year because of it, or the team is so good at running the ball and playing defense that in games like the Rams and the Packers where the defense and the run game took over, it didn't matter. So that argument bothers me too. And I know at this point we're spending a lot of time on it, but I do think this is probably the most fascinating conversation about the Eagles team at this point in time. But I will call it like I see it. I do think because of how people talk about Jalen Hurts today, I do think he is currently the most overrated player in the league. And I know a bunch of Eagles fans just clicked off and have no interest in watching the rest of the video, but I don't think that means he's bad. And it certainly doesn't mean that the Eagles can't do it again. Again, I think he has settled back down as a good tier 3 quarterback that in an ideal situation, they can absolutely win the Super Bowl again as early as this season. And it certainly doesn't mean I'm necessarily right either. This is just how I see it and my own opinion on it. And the unfortunate thing for me is that with Howie Roseman running the show here, this team is not going away anytime soon. Hurts is going to continue to have an unbelievable infrastructure, and it could be a long time until I get the opportunity to look right about this, where Hurts looks like less of a cog in the machine as opposed to the actual engine that has to drive this thing, like so many of the games other great quarterbacks have to be. And maybe that's why a lot of people are just kind of conceding, like, yeah, this is going to be the case for a while here. Jalen Hurts is going to continue to win a lot of games, and I just don't have the energy to fight with Eagles fans about it. And I think that's fair, but at least at this point in time, I'm still prepared to call it like I see it and go at it with Eagles fans because, look, it's fun. These types of conversations is what sports is all about. I think at the end of the day, look, the Eagles have a good quarterback here. They have a guy that throws with excellent touch and accuracy, that within the confines of this offense that it feels like they've really settled in with, he can protect the football. They can lean into his legs for the foreseeable future, get that numbers advantage in the run game by protecting the football. They can lean into what should be a great defense for a long time. And I also think Hurts deserves credit as well, which is something I consider here, that even on games when he doesn't play well, he does have that clutch factor. I think of that opening day against the Packers in Brazil and other points throughout the season where he kind of laid a stinker in the first half or the first three quarters. But he just kind of came back, took a deep breath and said, this is what I got to do. We'll go get it done and we'll go win the game. And that does matter. I can't take that away from him. And it's clearly shown in the biggest of moments that pressure is not going to phase him either. So there are absolutely redeeming qualities in Jalen Hurts' game that lead to me ranking him still with a good ranking here as the 12th overall quarterback. I just think when they've had to ask more of him as a passer, it hasn't led to results. He's not someone that's going to pick you apart from the pocket. His pocket presence drives me crazy at times, the way he kind of escapes out of clean pockets and leaves meat on the bones. His arm talent isn't that great. He's accurate, but he can't command the whole field with a strong arm and open up the whole passing game. He's a little bit more limited in that sense. And those are just the weaknesses I see in his game that prevent me from ranking him as the 5th or 6th best quarterback in the league. But anyway, if Eagles fans haven't clicked off at this point, let's carry on. I promise I'm not an Eagles hater. I just am someone that's going to call it like I see it. And if that means pushing back on the Jalen Hurts agenda, then so be it. But let's move forward and really celebrate the state that the rest of this Eagles team and roster is in. And honestly, that begins right away with the backup quarterback conversation. Tanner McKee has really emerged as quite possibly the most fascinating, call it like backup prospect in the league, in the sense of someone that teams might be eyeing as a potential starter like next year. And unfortunately, he broke his thumb, so they went and traded for Sam Howell. But I do think as soon as McKee's thumb recovers, he's going to resume as the backup. And, you know, he's been incredible in the preseason, but he played really well stepping in as the backup late last season. Evidence item number 20 as to just how good this infrastructure is. I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to play well here. Tanner McKee's no different, but he was a fascinating QB coming out. I definitely thought it was worth a day 2 pick, and the Eagles saw him sitting there in day 3 and were like, well, the value's too much to pass up. And this is the same organization that once upon a time flipped Kevin Kolb into, I think it was a 2nd-round pick in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. They flipped Carson Wentz into a 1st-round pick. They know the value of these backup QBs. They won a Super Bowl with frickin' Nick Foles. So, like, there's a lot of that going on with Tanner McKee. Wouldn't be surprised if I think this is year 3 for him. So some team maybe will view him as a potential kind of bridge / interesting prospect. He's still pretty young. He's going to be about the same age as a lot of QBs coming out these days. Just turned 25, so maybe a touch older than that, but he's interesting, man. 6'6", really strong arm guy, smart, underrated kind of playmaking instincts. He's not athletic in that sense, but I've always felt like he kind of manages pressure and can step up in the pocket and do things with his legs where he needs to. So definitely interested to see where the rest of his career goes. Sam Howell, not so much. I mean, I just don't think he sees the game well at all. If something were to happen to Hurts, Howell is an excellent runner, so they could kind of continue the style of offense that they want to run with Sam Howell. But again, I think they go back to Tanner McKee as soon as he's healthy. And then Kyle McCord, I don't know what's going on here, like why he necessarily fell to the 6th round and why nobody wants him off of the Eagles practice squad. But kind of similar to the Tanner McKee deal where just a lot of value there. I had him as a kind of 3rd round prospect, kind of shades of Baker Mayfield in there with a lot of playmaking ability. I don't know if we'll ever really see him in Philadelphia here at this point with all these names ahead of him. But definitely someone that I'm interested to see where his career path goes as well. But yeah, 12th at QB, which, spoiler alert here, is the lowest ranking position group on this roster. That's how insane this team is. So let's go to the pass catchers. Taking a look at their offseason changes. They're staying neutral here. Not a whole lot of movement, but they are seeing some new wide receivers in here. And unfortunately, Johnny Wilson, an exciting big-bodied year 2 rookie year 2 player, rookie last year, he's going to be done for the year here. But they go and get John Mechie, kind of an interesting redemption arc for him here in Philadelphia. Houston drafted him in the 2nd round. He battled through cancer, came back on the field, and then they kind of just forgot he existed. So I like the acquisition of Mechie. He makes this team. And then Darius Cooper as well made this team as an undrafted free agent. And then some subtle changes at tight end. No more Jack Stoll, and they bring in Kylan Granson. But I said neutral with the pass catchers, both wide receiver and tight end, which is no problemo for the Eagles because they do rank still, just as they would have last year, as tied for the best group of weapons in the league with 2 other teams who we now know are the Vikings and Bengals. I think the Eagles' group of weapons here is right on par with that group, and kind of the requirement to get into that category is to have a top shelf, absolute elite tier 1 wide receiver as the Eagles have here in A.J. Brown. And it's crazy to say this, but I almost think A.J. Brown is still underrated. Like, I made a wide receiver tier maker video, which, by the way, make sure you guys subscribe because I'm going to be doing tier maker videos even more this year. So if you enjoy my player rankings and analysis, you can get that here on this channel as the season goes on. But I did a wide receiver tier maker video, I think it was late September or early October. And I had A.J. Brown, I want to say is my number 2 wide receiver there in the league, and just a tick above Jamar Chase. I was debating which of those to put wide receiver 2, who to put wide receiver 3. And, obviously Jamar Chase went on and had the season he had. At this point, I would flip it and put Jamar Chase number 2. But I got slammed for it at the time. And to this day, I do not think it's crazy. I know PFF currently put out their wide receiver position rankings and had A.J. Brown number 1. I just don't think it's crazy. I mean, he obviously fits the description of that elite tier 1 wideout where he can threaten all 3 levels of the field, be dominant after the catch, and be dominant at the catch point. Those are the kind of 3 requirements for me to have as a true elite tier 1 type of guy. And yes, like I said, I would put Jamar Chase over him. He did go on and win the Triple Crown, but he also saw 60 more targets than A.J. Brown did. On an efficiency basis, A.J. Brown had the better yards per route run. He had less drops. He had a better contested catch win rate. He had the better yards per reception. And no, A.J. Brown isn't as fast as Jamar Chase, but I do think he's slightly more reliable. And it's not like A.J. Brown doesn't have elite traits. He does separate. He's developed into a surprisingly good route runner for such a big guy. But he is bar none the strongest wide receiver in the league. And yes, the speed of a Jamar Chase or maybe even like a Justin Jefferson is very alluring for football fans. But we don't talk enough about strength at wide receiver and how much that matters, especially when you have as much as A.J. Brown does without compromising being fast. Like, it's not flashy, but having play strength is a huge part of being able to separate at the NFL level. How often do you hear about these elite corners talk about how, yeah, I'm going to grab because more often than not, I'm not going to get flagged for it. That's NFL coverage in a nutshell. They're going to grab on your jersey. They're going to have that kind of armbar technique to try to act as a bumper and slow you down in a way that, it doesn't look like an egregious hold. You floating your arm out there. But the analogy I like to do is that helps corners basically treat that like drift in Mario Kart, where you're kind of slowing down the guy you're covering and stealing from their speed. Just the physics of it all, it's why that technique works. Well, that slows down a lot of great receivers in the game. Not A.J. Brown. Like, that does not faze him at his play strength. He will brush you off like a fly in the wind. And it's a huge part of his game. And then, of course, like, he is super tough to get down. He's bigger and stronger than most running backs. And that's going to help him at the catch point be as dominant as he is as well. So, look, we've debated, is it Justin Jefferson? Is it Jamar Chase? I would still lean towards those two ever so slightly. But honestly, if anybody wants to come out, just as PFF and friend of the channel Trevor Sikkema did, and say, actually, I think A.J. Brown is the best wide receiver in the league, I don't think it's crazy at all. So there's your starting point there. But then, yeah, this team just has Devonta Smith as your number 2 wide receiver, making $25 million a year. Like, it's a good thing that the Eagles win football games and Super Bowls, because I don't know another receiver in the league that would be happy being as dramatically underpaid as Devonta Smith is, especially with the jump in the wide receiver market. A guy that does not get the kind of glory that a player of his caliber should. And frankly, because he is in the shadow of A.J. Brown in a run-heavy offense, it's going to be very hard for Devonta Smith to reach really the level I think he would in a different scenario as a top 6 to 8 wide receiver in the league. I don't think it's crazy at all that if you dropped him on the Packers or maybe had him change places with CeeDee Lamb and the Cowboys, at least before George Pickens got there, or put him with Justin Herbert in LA, like any of those situations, I don't think it's crazy at all that we're talking about Devonta Smith in the same light that we say with like CeeDee Lamb, or, you know, even a step below that, maybe like a Terry McLaurin or maybe Puka Nacua, like in that 7 to 10 range of wide receivers. But because of the volume he gets here, and because he is under the shadow of A.J. Brown, we just can't quite make that leap yet. There are certain boxes that you want to check before you say a guy is a true number 1, including producing like one and showing that you can be that in your offense. And we just aren't going to see that here really in Philadelphia. But as far as watching his tape, this dude's an unbelievable route runner. He defies physics as well. Like, you have 2 of the biggest outliers, physically speaking, in the best of ways with this group. You have A.J. Brown, who's stronger than everybody, and then you have Devonta Smith that somehow gets to play at like 175 pounds. Looks like he shouldn't be able to win tough catches or play through contact or anything like that, but he somehow still does. I've always gone with the analogy of like, try to explain Devonta Smith to your high school physics teacher. It's not going to go very well. It just doesn't really make sense. I mean, we're talking about one of the most dominant college receivers of all time at Alabama that's done so much of the same stuff here at the NFL level. So to have him as your number 2 is just unbelievable. And you talk so much about having complementary skill sets. These 2 guys play off each other so well, because Smith has a little bit more juice in terms of the quickness aspect of the position. And then A.J. Brown brings that thumper mentality. This is kind of like the receiver equivalent in some ways to like the Thunder and Lightning backfields of the league. And if there's one holdup on Devonta Smith, we did praise him for he's stronger than he should be. That shows up at the catch point, winning tough catches. It shows up breaking tackles after the catch. I will say there are times where if he draws like the best like physical corners in the league, there are times where he can struggle to get off press and separate against some of that physical coverage. But luckily, most teams will take that corner and try to match him up on A.J. Brown, leaving Devonta Smith against number 2 wide receivers. So they're basically granted the ability to hide any potential weakness that Devonta Smith might have. And even then, it's like, he still is usually going to beat those things. Personally, and this is a little bit of a detour, but if I were playing the Eagles, I would focus on double teaming A.J. Brown with my number 2 corner and actually taking your number 1 and just going one-on-one with Devonta Smith. That would be my approach. I don't think we've seen too many teams try that. But honestly, with the way that they run this offense, I've talked about how they kind of simplified things. If they're not feeding the ball to these 2 guys, Jalen Hurts is going to take off and run and use his legs and get in a scramble drill. The rest of these guys just don't see the ball that much. Brown and Smith made up 60% of their targets last year. And then you have Dallas Goddard, got 15%. Saquon got 12%. It's about 90% right there with just 4 players. perfect example here of something I've talked about specifically with this Eagles team. Like, there have been times when people are like, oh, the Eagles need to go get a wide receiver 3 in the draft or sign somebody or something like that. And it's like, there is a such thing as too many mouths to feed and having a law of diminishing returns. Why focus on having a good wide receiver 3 here when you're just ultimately taking targets away from much better football players? About 90% of the targets here are going to A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Saquon Barkley. That works pretty damn nicely as long as these guys are able to stay healthy, which fortunately last year these guys barely missed any time. But I do think that's relevant if we want to talk about the rest of these wide receivers, like especially with Jahan Dotson. I think there's this narrative that Dotson was a disappointing trade for the Eagles. That, you know, they gave, I think it was a 3rd-round pick for Dotson, and he ends up with just 22 catches for 269 yards. Well, they didn't need Dotson. They were smart about it for the reasons we just said, but what if Brown did get hurt? And I know he missed time earlier in the season, but the Eagles were caught up in the suck at that point in time. What if Brown got hurt later in the season when things were actually working here in Philadelphia and Hurts was playing well? Then I think this team would have been much happier to have Jahan Dotson, who even later in the season showed that he can still play. Week 18, when they were resting starters, he had 7 catches for 94 yards. And in the Super Bowl, he had 2 awesome catches and was a factor in them getting ahead early. Showed that, okay, if the Chiefs are going to try to scheme things up and double Brown and take away Devonta Smith, we can isolate Jahan Dotson on the Chiefs' number 3 corner, and he can still get open and catch a nice touch pass down the sideline. Obviously, with his lack of production, I can't sit here and pound the table and be like, oh my God, Jahan Dotson is back and he's the best wide receiver 3 in the league. But I don't think it's insane to think, especially with how he played later in the season, to say they might have one of the better wide receiver 3s in the league and that Dotson might be a much better player at this point in his career than that 74 rating I have on him. He looked great early in his Washington career. I think got in his head a little bit and maybe was still in his head coming over here early in his time in Philadelphia. But I do think he settled in nice late in the season. Obviously, if everything's going well, it's going to be more of the same, where he's just not seeing the ball very often with how they run this offense. But what a nice backup to have. And if something did happen to Brown or Smith, I don't think a breakout from Jahan Dotson and getting a pretty nice contract in free agency is out of the question. So I'm not quite ready to say that that was a bad trade from Howie Roseman, as some will. And then John Mechie is kind of a similar process here. A 2nd-round pick, talented player coming out of Alabama, but just since he recovered from cancer, just has been kind of an afterthought in Houston. I don't think he's been able to play with a lot of confidence and settle back in. We'll see if he can kind of get that back under him, but kind of in a similar, overall build as guys like Smith and Dotson and Mechie. These guys are all a little bit skinnier, but very athletic and theoretically good separators with good ball skills. So why not bring him in on the cheap? And then Darius Cooper makes this team. I'm not overly familiar with him, but he's shown some good stuff in the preseason. But those are your core wide receivers. It's a bummer that Johnny Wilson got hurt. Very fun, big wide receiver. But we're not done praising this group of weapons. In fact, before we talked about the wide receiver depth, it probably would have made more sense to praise Dallas Goedert and Saquon Barkley, who are some of the best, 3rd and 4th pass catching options that you could possibly imagine in a passing game in today's NFL. Dallas Goedert, his volume has gone down as they've found A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. There hasn't been a need to give Dallas Goedert the ball too much. Kind of similar to what we've seen at times with George Kittle in San Francisco. But his efficiency is just as good as ever. He still has an awesome contested catch win rate. He's still awesome after the catch. Case in point, that playoff game against the Packers where he Carrington Valentine into the end zone for that big touchdown. But he had a career high in yards per reception last year. He's still an outstanding blocker. He's still a top 10 tight end by the tape, in my opinion, and he's become an afterthought in this offense. Like in your fantasy drafts, like I always see Dallas Goedert going like the 2nd to last round, and it's not even crazy because they just don't have a need to throw him the football that much. But when they do, it's a damn luxury to have him. And he's only halfway on his way to 31 years old, by the way. He's not as old as you might think. And then Saquon. Obviously, we'll have time to praise Saquon in the running back segment, but he made some awesome plays as a receiver, as a receiving running back last year. The way they would use him on like wheel routes and stuff, made some really tough catches. He is a guy that's battled drops throughout his career. He's never really broken through as like an absolute elite receiving threat, but God, he is not someone you want to see catching the ball on checkdowns. And man, there's even room for him to improve this rating and into future deep dives as well, because he did, in my opinion, make some of the toughest catches he's made in his career for this Eagles team last year. So for him to have to be a fourth piece that you have to worry about here is obviously annoying. And then we can kind of gloss over the rest of it. You've got Grant Calcaterra, Kylan Granson. This team did run 12 personnel about a third of the time last year, so they love that setup with Goddard being that full-size Y tight end. And then both Calcaterra and Granson are like interchangeable options, in my opinion, as that athletic wing tight end for 12 personnel. So they'll have their moments getting open over the middle of the field off of play action mostly. And then other backs here, Will Shipley is fascinating to me. You know, you're not going to take Saquon off the field too much, but as someone that did touch the ball like 450 times last year in Saquon Barkley, it was actually closer to 500 times, which is just absurd. The Eagles might try to relieve him of some of those touches, and, you know, third down work could absolutely go Will Shipley's way, where he was an awesome receiving back. It was bold and probably stupid of me, but I compared him to NFL Reggie Bush coming out of Clemson. I think the way he can accelerate and run routes out in space and project it as a potentially dominant receiving back, which really is what Reggie Bush was at the NFL level, it's something I'm not going to entirely write off yet, although it was probably stupid to say that. We'll see, though. He's looked good in the preseason. And then A.J. Dillon is actually, in my opinion, a better receiving back than he is an actual running back. He's just kind of tough for cornerbacks to get down on the ground when he catches dump downs, and he's got pretty smooth hands. It's not necessarily what you think about with A.J. Dillon, but if he deserves praise, it's there as a receiving back. But yeah, there is your unbelievably talented group of weapons that ranks as high as first in the league. Let's now go to the backfield where we can keep that streak going. The number one running back ranking in the league for me. First things first, let's take a look at their offseason changes, though, where they don't really see any significant changes there. They do lose Kenneth Gainwell. He was low-key, like, not good the last couple of years, in my opinion. You would think with how Miles Sanders looked here and how good the run game is and the leap Saquon took here that KG would have been successful. I don't know, man. Very, few flashes, and those flashes were few and far between. So not much of a loss there. I'm excited to see if Will Shipley can live up to more of those expectations that KG just didn't, unfortunately. But obviously this backfield is all about Saquon Barkley. Well-deserved crown at this position, and was maybe the most well-documented player in the NFL last year, so I don't feel the need to spend that much time on Saquon here, but yeah, just what a season, man. So fun to see a guy that I think we all knew was capable of having one of the best running back seasons of all time because of what he was as a prospect. Like, it comes all the way back to that. This dude is a Greek god of an athlete with built-in-a-lab traits. He is your Madden creative player running back that's been stuck behind an egregious offensive line for 6 years with the Giants. He comes and gets to run behind the, spoiler alert, best offensive line in the league. And through the playoffs, you get a 2,500-yard season, and probably would have broken the rushing record if they played him Week 18. But honestly, that would have been stupid. And it would have been stupid because of really the only drawback on Saquon Barkley. We already talked about it a little bit. But look, the Eagles did get lucky last year to have Saquon healthy and available from start to finish. The fact that he did not get banged up was an outlier on his career, and especially considering he touched the ball about 50 times, 436 carries, and 46 receptions. I'm not going to predict injury or anything like that, but it will be interesting to see if the Eagles want to risk it again, considering the rest of this backfield is pretty unproven. If Saquon does get not just hurt and miss time, but if he gets banged up, if he gets if he rolls an ankle or isn't able to be the best version of himself, and especially loses a little bit of that acceleration and top speed that is a core part of him hitting the biggest asset that he has, which is those breakaway runs. He had 1,100 breakaway yards last year. Those are yards that came on 15-plus yard runs. If those come down a little bit and Saquon is just a really good running back, kind of like we saw in 2023, where yes, he didn't have the run blocking, but he had 300 breakaway yards compared to 1,100 breakaway yards. His missed tackle rate was about half. His yards per attempt was almost 2 full yards less. Obviously, he's got much better run blocking here in Philadelphia, but what I'm essentially getting at is maybe Saquon's the 9th best running back in the league, and you're not getting those game-breaking breakaway runs. Maybe that changes the math of how everything plays out with this Eagles offense. I think if something goes wrong with this Eagles offense that I had to bet on, that might be it given his injury history, but that's kind of searching for anything negative to say here. Obviously, I have them ranked first at running back, and gun to my head, I would say, yeah, I mean, he's probably going to put up 2,000 yards and be a complete menace once again. Now, as far as the backups go, that is, like I said, where an injury to Saquon would be more concerning. I like Will Shipley. I'm excited to see him and excited to see if maybe they do want to give their backup running back more touches this year because of the durability questions on Saquon. And Shipley, like, not only was he I'll just stick with it, I'll stand my ground for now, a Reggie Bush-esque receiving threat as a prospect. He had underrated vision and toughness between the tackles, and I think in a spread-style offense like this, he's got a chance to be a pretty nice back, and we've seen some good runs in the preseason, so I do like him. Like, he was out there trucking dudes at Clemson. I'm excited to see more Will Shipley this year. And then you got A.J. Dillon. Look, I praised him in the receiving game. That's where I'm going to stop praising him. He has stuck in the mud acceleration, some of the worst acceleration you'll ever see from a running back. And it actually makes him a pretty poor power back because even though he's big, he has no momentum as he collides with defenders. So I wouldn't so much be excited to see an increased workload for him. And then because this is a full backfield breakdown here, we're not going to discuss it any further as far as Jalen Hurts' impact on the run game. It's obviously a big deal with this offense and how things work, and they leaned into it more as I described, but they do rank as high as 5th for the QB run multiplier that I give these teams in this series. So we had the best group of weapons, the best backfield, and now the best offensive line in the league. They rank number 1 for both pass blocking and run blocking. This group is just absurdly talented, not just Howie Roseman with how he's built this group, but the Eagles also have Jeff Stoutland, who's widely regarded as the best offensive line coach in the league. And you look at the immense growth of someone like Jordan Mailata is really what you point to most there. But a guy like Cam Jurgens coming along and Tyler Steen stepping in and giving him some benefit of the doubt, what they did with Mekhi Becton last year. Everything seems to work for this offensive line, and that's really been at the absolute heart of everything the Eagles have done is trench play, O-line and D-line. Before we break this unit down, we do need to look at their offseason changes here. As we mentioned, Mekhi Becton stepped in and was a very pleasant surprise for this team this year. I feel like the Eagles felt like they got lucky here as well, probably even more so than what we described with like Saquon Barkley staying available. They happened to get the only year that Mekhi Becton stayed mostly healthy. He played 81% of their snaps. He gets a 2-year, $20 million contract with the Chargers. But I don't think the Eagles wanted to take that risk. And as we just praised their offensive line coaching, they want to trust their scouting and development here. They really bring in 4 dart throws, 3 day 3 draft picks in Drew Kendall at center, and then a pair of tackle prospects in Cam Williams out of Texas and Miles Hinton out of Michigan, along with a dart throw on Kenyon Green that they did get returned into the sort of salary dump trade away of their safety, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. A lot of fascinating dart throws, and I like the process here, but on paper, I think you do have to say downgraded, at least for now, for the offensive line when you look at this offseason, leaving at least one area of the offensive roster with some relative questions here. Like, this offensive line is probably not going to be anything worse than the 6th best offensive line, but it is a weak link position, and they do potentially have a weak link at right guard. That is, roster-wise, probably the biggest wild card on this Eagles team. So let's actually start there with Tyler Steen stepping in. He was a 3rd-round pick out of Alabama and a tackle. He has not played well when they've asked him to play. you can talk as much trash on PFF grades as you want, but when you're in the red, you're doing something quite wrong. And Tyler Steen, on 180 pass blocking snaps last year, at a PFF pass blocking grade of 37.5, and on 180 snaps, he gave up 8 pressures and had 6 penalties as well, which definitely hurt his grading profile as well. So he's got a lot to clean up. That said, there have been splash performances. Week 3 against New Orleans, not the best defensive line, but he did have 36 snaps, gave up 0 pressures in a start. PFF pass blocking grade of 88 in that game. And he had to play in the conference championship game against Washington. He played okay-ish in that game, but there were obviously some pretty concerning performances scattered throughout the rest of the season there that made his whole body of work questionable. But I will say, with some of those flashes of better performances, with the guy that is super strong, I liked him as a third-round prospect coming out of Alabama, getting to work with Jeff Stoutland. There's plenty of reason to believe he can settle in and not just be a adequate guard. He actually has the traits to be a pretty damn good guard. And gun to my head, I would say this is probably going to work. He's probably going to land as a pretty decent player and not be a weak link. But we have seen this player be a weak link in other performances before. So that's kind of your only question mark here, is how that gets settled. If he just sucks, you are going to have to really scheme around that, make sure he's getting double team help, and, be ready for him to give up some quick pressures and maybe hurt you on a few drives here and there, in which case the overall offensive line might only be the 5th or 6th best unit in the league. But as long as he's just okay, this is the best offensive line in the league. And frankly, if it's so bad out the gate, they did sign Matt Pryor, who wasn't a turnstile in Chicago. His biggest problem was with the rest of that unit really identifying and picking up blitzes and stunts, where I think the coaching and established players around him would help that weakness much more. It makes sense for them to want to go with Tyler Steen, but Matt Pryor is much more established as a non-weak link for this offensive line. So they got a capable backup to plug in there if need be. But obviously the rest of this group is excellent, and we probably don't need to spend that much time on these guys. I mean, you have by far the best tackle duo in the league. Not just one, but 2 elite tackles. Lane Johnson really showing no signs of slowing down. He had an argument for being the best tackle in the NFL last year as the best pass blocker, and still a great athlete at his age, and a great run blocker as well. If there's a second question mark on this offensive line, it's, does Father Time come from him, or does he get banged up? I mean, this thing really took a U-turn. 2019 through 2021, there was 3 straight seasons where his availability had become a major concern. And at that point, he was 31, 32 years old. There was even some talks about if they need to look for his replacement. The last 3 years, he's thrown the middle finger to Father Time and has just completely settled back down and played the best football of his career. So I'm certainly not saying he's regressing, but he is 35 years old. That's probably the only other question mark on this offensive line. But again, with this Eagles team, you're really searching to find those weak links in the armor. Maybe that could be one of them. And if he gets hurt, you don't have the tackle depth to really count on. We mentioned Matt Pryor, but the only good play he's shown in the league has been as a guard in Chicago, so I don't know about him as a tackle backup. Fred Johnson did have to play a little bit last year, and that was hard to watch. They did spend a couple of day 3 picks on developmental options in Cam Williams and Miles Hinton that I'm very excited to see develop here underneath Lane Johnson and Jeff Stoutland. I think the probability that one of those guys could hit and be something like the next guy we're going to talk about here in Jordan Mailata, maybe not quite to the same degree, but both really traitsy guys that need the right coaching, maybe could be their tackle of the future behind Lane Johnson. I think physical tools-wise, plus the setup for them to develop, a very smart process to take those dart throws on those 2 guys in this draft. But in terms of early impact, you wouldn't expect too much. So you definitely need to see Lane Johnson stay healthy. But then at left tackle, Jordan Mailata, I debated actually putting the up arrow on Jordan Mailata because he's still relatively new to competitive football. He's heading into his 6th season in the NFL, but they brought him over from Australia having not played a college ball. It was something I eventually decided not to put the up arrow on him because, he was one of the best tackles in the entire NFL last year. You could make a case that it was Lane Johnson and then Jordan Mailata, and then Penei Sewell based on production, because Jordan Mailata was just about as good as Penei Sewell as a run blocker and was actually more efficient as a pass blocker. And we are talking about a 6'8", 365-pound tackle with just, again, built in a lab traits. I mean, what they've found in this guy is insane. I don't know if there's any more room for him to go up, but there just might be. So that's pretty damn crazy to think. I stayed away from it and said that was probably the last stage of his development in all likelihood, but I think it's at least worth mentioning, like, yeah, there might be even another step for Mailata to just become kind of a, for example, TFG 99 overall club and establish like himself as a Hall of Fame talent on the offensive line within the next couple of years here. But he's obviously just absurd, and to pair those traits with a guy that clearly has put in the work to develop the right technique and toughness you need at this position, there's not enough words to really quantify it. But then you got Landon Dickerson at left guard, top 10 left guard there, very balanced player. He's played center, so he's smart, but I think Dickerson has always been the perfect last name for him because he has what I look for in a lot of offensive linemen, that dickhead mentality to get in your face and finish blocks. He's not always perfect in terms of pass protection. He's had some games that were worse than others, and he's someone that you can beat in pass pro, but he's better than a lot of guards, that's for damn sure. So I would just say top 10 guard there in Landon Dickerson. And then I did put the up arrow on Cam Jurgens as their center. Last year was his second year as a starter. This will be a big year for him to see, like, just where is he going to land in terms of NFL ranks among centers. He's still got to get better in pass pro. Now, for the most part, they're going to just take Jurgens and Steen and combine these guys in double teams and hide these guys that way. But if you can isolate Jurgens, he doesn't anchor well and even misses with his hands at times. So we'll see just how much better he can get there. Right now, he's a good center because of his run blocking, and he's an absolute asset there, but very kind of Garrett Bradbury-esque in terms of someone that maybe he's more maxed out as an undersized guy with great athleticism that's going to struggle more in pass pro. And maybe it does turn out that Jason Kelce just was kind of one of one as being a guy that can be good in both phases, not just good, but great in both phases, despite being an undersized center. That rounds out your starters. As far as any other depth we haven't mentioned, your interior depth is also pretty shaky other than Matt Pryor. So they can survive one injury at guard. But at center, you would be talking probably about rookie Drew Kendall, maybe Brett Toth, who's played a little bit. Very unproven in those regards. Maybe they found something in Kendall. Wouldn't be the craziest idea in the world. But then you have Kenyon Green, who, I mean, honestly, lump Kenyon Green in with Cam Williams and Miles Hinton. First round bust for the Texans that they traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for. But if anyone's going to make him work out in time, it would be Jeff Stoutland. But he has really struggled, and the fact that he didn't make the initial cuts is not a great sign for him. But obviously just special stuff here. The team that Howie Roseman has built here to have the number one ranking group of weapons, offensive line, and running back. I just don't know if we'll ever see that again, which puts Eagles in pretty rare territory here with the window they've created for themselves here. So they come out as my number one ranking overall offense, and the biggest part of that is your number one ranked run game there. And then they came out fifth for passing game as well, this side of the ball. And that's with those kind of wait and see rankings on the offensive coordinator here and at right guard. If they hit green lights there, if Tyler Steen is a good player, which is absolutely possible with him as a player, and if they nail this offensive coordinator hire, I mean, pun intended, they're going to fly away from the rest of the league. But it doesn't stop there, man. They have a lot of talent on defense as well. We obviously saw what this unit did last year, but they are seeing their fair share of turnover on this side of the ball, right? The offense, it was really just, okay, coordinator and right guard, much less volatility there. There's a lot more shakeup as far as the offseason goes with the defense. And as we start with the defensive line, we'll see that first off here. And we mentioned it in the intro. They lose the two most expensive pass rushers in free agency in both the interior, Milton Williams, and Josh Sweat on the edge. Unless I'm forgetting somebody, but I do believe those are the two biggest defensive line contracts this free agency. And honestly, they're more counting on some of the guys they've invested in to step into those shoes than they are going out and replacing those players. And we'll discuss those guys. As we'll see, though, there's a lot of potential for that to work out just fine for this team. But on paper, you have to say downgraded. Losing those two players. There's also some other losses in there as well. On the interior of the D-line, they traded Thomas Booker, depth piece, for Jacorian Bennett at cornerback. And then on the edge, Brandon Graham retires, and they did say goodbye to Bryce Huff, who was one of their big free agent signings last year. Wasn't much of a contributor for them there. Played just 23% of their snaps. But as far as additions go, you're talking about on the interior of the D-line, a 4th-round developmental pick in Ty Robinson. And then on the edge, just some kind of Band-Aid options. Josh Uche, who's becoming a journeyman pass rusher at this point. Azeez Ojulari, I think, is heading towards that stage of his career. And Ogbo Okoronkwo, another journeyman veteran pass rusher. But despite all of the turnover, like I said, they still have some exciting existing talent and guys that they're hoping will step up. And that is reflected in the defensive line rankings that are still pretty good, ranking top 8 for overall defensive line, but 6th to 10th for pass rush and 5th to 10th for D-line run defense. There's still a ton of balance and, of course, potential. But I did put that wild card icon next to the defensive line, calling this group kind of a pivotal factor, question mark for this team to see just how good they could be. But some of the spots in this series where we put that wild card on, it's like this could go wrong or it could go great. This is more of a wild card to say like this could go amazingly well, or it could just be closer to kind of how we rank them right now, where it's like, yeah, it's a top 10 unit. They're really good, but maybe not a game-wrecking force. And the reason I say that is 4 of their 5 starters, I put the up arrow on, saying they're either more unproven or there's potentially another level in there to be unlocked. So if 2 or 3, or God forbid for the rest of the league, all 4 of those guys with those green arrows do land on the right side of the coin, I mean, that's not going to be good news for the rest of the league. But with this unit, I want to kind of go through the pecking order of things, and that's got to start with Jalen Carter on the interior. Carter, obviously a blue chip, highly perceived prospect that it's just a joke that the Eagles were able to get him because of the Saints' over-aggressiveness with their team-building philosophy, and then the fact that he had a sketchy situation at Georgia that a lot of teams were scared of, and the Eagles said, no, we're never going to have an opportunity to draft a guy like this because we're such a good team. We're going to roll the dice there, and basically Jalen Carter seems to have totally matured, and that hasn't been an issue at all. And if there were any questions about Jalen Carter, it was, I think, just maturity in the sense of, can he take his unbelievable physical tools, where he's probably going to be able to be pretty solid as a player just off of those tools alone, where he's got natural power and unbelievable quickness for a full-size defensive tackle. But is he the type of guy that is going to work at his craft, develop rush moves, continue to work at his body, and reach the unbelievable heights that he's capable of? I think that was maybe the only question on him coming out as a prospect, and he has made that a resounding yes. He has gotten better every single year. Just like we said, as a rookie, he was good and won with some incredible flashes. Year 2, he emerged as a top 10 or so defensive tackle. Last year, he was one of the best interior defensive players in the league. Probably 4th or 5th last year behind Dexter Lawrence, Chris Jones. Honestly, got to give Cam Hayward his flowers for his performance last year. And then probably Jalen Carter, unless I'm forgetting someone. And now, heading into this season, I still have the up arrow on him to say, like, look, this guy absolutely has that Chris Jones potential and trajectory where, all right, he started as a 50 pressure guy in his rookie season, 75 pressures last year. Chris Jones, more of an 85 to 100 pressure type of guy, being that elite best pass rusher in the league. Is that next step in there with Jalen Carter? And it absolutely could be. But if he doesn't develop, you're still talking about, again, a top 5 interior player in the league, someone that's just so hard to block one-on-one because he's so quick off the ball, so powerful, and then he's gotten good enough with his finesse in terms of crossing your face with swipes. He's got that kind of Euro step swim move to his game. Again, just totally has come together. And he's a pretty good run defender. I don't think that's the biggest focus for him, and I don't think that's the biggest focus that the Eagles have really asked of him, right? Like, he's good at getting off blocks. He's got instincts. He's still a very good run defender, but it's for him, it's focusing on those third downs and developing his pass rush technique, and that's totally fine. That's the same deal with Chris Jones. especially when you have Jordan Davis next to him. Let's just talk about Jordan Davis. He might not be next in line in the pecking order for pass rush, but like I said, this is a top 10 D-line for run defense as well, and that's where Jordan Davis comes in. He has maybe not reached his utmost potential and shown a ton of development, frankly, in the league. Coming out, it was like, man, this guy's really athletic considering how big he is and dominant against the run he is, but there are just very few pass rushing nose tackles that can genuinely change the game. But it was kind of like, all right, is this going to be like a Vita Vea type of guy that can do a little bit of both, or is he just going to settle in as a really good space eating nose tackle? I'm not going to say he can't continue to get better as a pass rusher and prove that there's more in the tank there, but at this point I'm not necessarily projecting that. I think with him as that space eating nose tackle, he is probably a top 5 to 8 run defending nose tackle in the game today, and his existence here is very important for them to get into third downs, allow Jalen Carter to not have to be an elite run defender on top of being a great pass rusher. It's a great setup with those two guys, and even if he's not emerged as like a household name or anything like that, I don't think the Eagles would necessarily take a do-over on that draft pick or anything like that. It is hard to find guys like him. But as far as the pass rushers go, like obviously Jalen Carter is your number one, and he's going to demand double teams, and a lot of times he's going to beat those double teams. But you're looking at now losing Milton Williams and losing Josh Sweat, who were awesome number 2 guys to complement Jalen Carter last year. Those guys were really able to capitalize on getting one-on-one opportunities and helped this be one of the best pass rushes in the league last year, if not the best. And those 2 guys are gone. So you're hoping to lean into some of these other guys like Moro Ojomo, Nolan Smith, maybe even Jalix Hunt to take that step up into the level that Josh Sweat and Milton were at. And I think it's possible for either of these guys, honestly. Like Nolan Smith, that's much more self-explanatory. He's really coming to his own. I think it took some time for him to really figure everything out. Was kind of a unique player coming out of that Georgia system. He's a 6'2", 240-pound edge rusher, but like hyper athletic, so much speed. And his first year, he was pretty much non-existent. He was buried on the depth chart. He played just 200 snaps, had just 9 pressures, 2 sacks, very forgettable rookie season. And even early last season, he was really just getting like 1.3 pressures per game on average, playing a lot more. But in the second half of the year, boom, it clicked. Started beating guys with his athleticism. He can bull rush you. And just like he showed at Georgia, this guy has no right being as good at defending the run as he is. He's kind of their Devonta Smith on this D-line where you look at him and say, yeah, that guy should be one of the worst run defending edge rushers in the league. He's closer to being one of the better ones than he is one of the worst ones. That's for damn sure. And it's all just effort and raw play strength relative to his size. So he's got really a little bit of everything. The pro comp on him coming out was always something like a Hassan Reddick, something Eagles fans are familiar with here. You know, Reddick was a low-end 1, high-end 2. If Nolan Smith can take that big leap this year, you're really in business. Like, he has potential to be someone that isn't just what Josh Sweat was as a quality number 2, which you're more than happy with when you have a Jalen Carter. But maybe Nolan Smith can be even more than that and be more of a game-wrecking force for this D-line. And if that happens with Jalen Carter, even if that happens with what Jalen Carter was last year, you're talking about this being probably more of a top 3 or 4 pass rush in the league. And then, of course, if Jalen Carter produces like Chris Jones and then Nolan Smith is peak Hassan Reddick, yeah, you're in scary territory there. But there's some other guys that might step up as well. Moro Ojomo really impressed me last year. Like, they keep finding these guys, dude. Like, Ojomo, I thought, was a really solid early day 3 prospect, had really good run defense technique coming out of Texas. You know, a little undersized, but wasn't like this crazy tester, but was pretty athletic. He ends up going in the 7th round in 2023, which was definitely, I think most draft analysts would have said was a steal, but I don't think anybody would have imagined he would emerge as a potential, like, high-end, like legit, maybe number 2 type of guy, and someone that you're asking with like realistic expectations to replace what Milton Williams was as a guy that hit free agency and got $25 million a year, right? Well, dude, he has absolutely shown that he can give you a lot of what Milton Williams did. I'm so impressed by his get off, his power, some of the finesse he's brought to the table. This was not in his tape at Texas. This has been pure development from him, from a guy that hardly played in 2023. And then last year, as their fourth defensive tackle, he ends up with 39 pressures on just 342 pass rush snaps. That's outstanding, especially for an interior D lineman. And he's one of the primed and ready to go, like, breakout candidates in the league this year. Unfortunately, I didn't get to making my breakout video this year. We ran out of time with the deep dives. But he would be at the very top of it, honestly. And he's a solid run defender, too. I think there's room for him to get better in that phase, too, because that was something that he always projected as coming out of Texas, was a pretty stable player there. I think he could be even a more stout, reliable run defender than Milton Williams was, even if he doesn't have the twitch and pass rushing upside. So I already feel good about him, but I think there's another level for Ojamo to break through as more of a stud defensive lineman. And then you got Jalix Hunt, their developmental third-round rookie edge rusher from last year, coming out of Houston Christian, but with a ton of traits, and someone that fought his way onto the field as early as his rookie season. And, you know, he finished with a 5-pressure, 1-sack game in the Super Bowl. And I think his performance, not just in that game, but the week before against Washington, he had some really impressive pressures. I think what he showed down the stretch is what really led the Eagles to say, you know what? We probably could bring Josh Sweat back or bring Milton Williams back, one of the two. We could probably find a way to make it work. But we're so impressed by Jalix Hunt's character paired with his traits and the development he's already shown that we think he could emerge as a Josh Sweat-esque player. And honestly, I don't think that's crazy. He's much less proven and probably more of a true wild card question mark compared to Ojamo and Smith that I think have more established themselves as at least good players. Jalix Hunt, like, it's really just been in flashes. There's a chance where Jalix Hunt isn't all that good, and you're looking at this edge group, and it is going to be more of Azeez Ojulari and Uche and Okoronkwo, and you know, you end up with okay performances there, but you're probably walking the next offseason wanting a little bit more on the edge. I think that's possible, but it's also possible that Jalix Hunt, just as Josh Sweat was a third-round pick with a lot of traits, could emerge as something like that type of player. So if that hits, if Nolan Smith becomes Hassan Reddick and Moro Ojamo becomes Milton Williams, is obviously going to be the easy comparison there, but you know, something close to what Milton was last year. If they hit their green lights here, it's game over. Like, you're just not gonna beat this Eagles team, because we already talked about the offense. If they have the best D-line in the league, which is on the table for this team, let's just start the 2027 season now. But they have depth worth talking about here, especially on the edge. Like, I think it's smart how they went about this. Surprise, Howie Roseman, good GM. If Jalix Hunt can't be what they're hoping he can be, you're getting a bunch of guys that have like shown good stuff in the league. Azeez Ojulari, if you have to ask him to be the 5th best member of your defensive line and start on the edge and just, you know, survive with him for a year, you can do that. He's missed a lot of time over the years, but you know, he's a physically limited but capable all-around player. Josh Uche as kind of a flamethrower off the edge, someone that has kind of had a falling out in the league, but has still shown an incredible high upside. Like, there's some of that Hassan Reddick, Nolan Smith archetype there to him as kind of a, you know, 235-pound edge rusher, if you will. And they've found success with those types of guys. So I like the gamble on it. There's a world where Josh Uche is this team's second best edge rusher. Shit, the one good year he had in New England was better than anything Nolan Smith's shown so far, so maybe he's even their best edge rusher. But he gets the up and down yellow arrow for me because he has just completely fallen by the wayside, and there might be something bigger going on there where he doesn't really give them much, but I like that as a flyer. And then Agbanya Okoronkwo gets released by the Browns, and the Eagles are like, yeah, sure, why not? We got another spot on this roster for a guy like him that's been a savvy pass rusher for as long as he's really been in the league. Like, you have options and floor raisers so that you're not going to be awful off the edge. And then in terms of interior D-line depth, they certainly don't have the depth that they had last year. Obviously, Ojamo goes from having to be your 4 to now being your 2.5 or your 3. Essentially, Davis and Ojamo will rotate for the most part. But they're going to have to count on the development of some of these very unproven guys. You know, Byron Young was a 3rd-round pick for the Raiders that was on this team last year but didn't play, I think. Ty Robinson, an interesting 4th-round pick, a lot of traits and high-energy guy coming out of Nebraska. He's at least fascinating. Kind of needs to settle down a little bit and improve his technique and his pad level, but there's a lot of potential for him to be Nice rotational player for them. And then Gabe Hall was a really twitched up guy coming out of Baylor, but hasn't really played much in the league to this point. But it's a fun defensive line, man, and I'll close by summarizing what I've said. Like, where we have them ranked now, as we do in this series, is kind of at their floor, is about a top 8 defensive line. That'll do. Like, they'll be able to survive that just fine. But if they hit their green lights here, this could be the best defensive line in the league, in which case it's probably over for the rest of the NFL. But let's go to the second level with these linebackers. This was a revelation for this team last year when we had this Eagles deep dive. Linebacker looked like a huge question mark. And look, I will victory lap and celebrate. You know, my take last year was that if I had to pick anybody to be the best linebacker out of that group last year, my choice was going to be Zach Bond out of that unit. Good take by me. By no stretch of the imagination did I imagine him being first team All-Pro and having the year he did, though he did show some exciting flashes in New Orleans. But what I'm getting at here, because we're jumping the gun a little bit, breaking down this unit before taking a look at their offseason changes, the upgrades that this linebacker unit has made from being one of the worst in the league heading into last year to now one of the better in the league with the breakout of Zach Bond and now drafting Jahad Campbell in the first round, it's just insane. Beyond that, they lose Oren Burks, who was a good depth player for them, stepped in valiantly when Nakobe Dean got hurt last year. I didn't know necessarily where to list Nakobe Dean on here. I don't know necessarily how much time he's going to miss because he missed the last 4 games of the year last year, whatever it was. I don't know if he's going to miss more than that this year. So I kind of just left him off in terms of are they getting more from him? Are they getting less from him? But they did also draft Smail Mondin out of Georgia in the 5th round there. But yeah, pretty crazy for the Eagles that if they had any Achilles heel going back to the 2023 defense and coming into last year, it was like, well, at least their linebackers aren't very good. That's not the case anymore. They ranked as my 4th overall linebacker unit, balanced across the board, top 6 for linebacker coverage, and then as high as 7th for linebacker run defense. There's a lot more depth for run defending linebackers in the league than there is for coverage. So they rank 7th to 14th for linebacker run defense, but really B grades across the board and potential for these to be like A grades and for this to be the best linebacker unit in the league. And honestly, similar conversation here with the linebackers as we had with the D-line, where I put the wild card indicator on this group too. And not to say wild card that this could be a bad group, but wild card to say that this could be even better, where maybe you're walking out of this now with best weapons, best offensive line, best running back, best defensive line. And I don't think it's crazy that this could be the best group of linebackers in the league. They already rank 4th, and there's further upside to be unlocked here. But I also feel pretty good saying that the floor is pretty damn high with this group too. So let's start with Zach Bond. Obviously broke out, first team All-Pro last year. Unbelievable traits. The guy has been clearly played out of position in New Orleans, and they struggled to identify his talent. It's a shame, but man, did the Eagles find this guy and get to say they got the most out of him feels like you're underselling it. I mean, he was unbelievable. And frankly, it's been a while since I've watched a linebacker season and said, that's something close to what Fred Warner does. I mean, we've talked about that with the Niners deep dive. Like, Fred is creme de la creme, a tier above everybody else. If Zach Bond is able to repeat what he did last year in a 1-year breakout type of setting, where I do just want to see more than 1 year from any NFL player before I crown them as an elite overall player. If Zach Bond is able to follow that up, and there's really no reason based on the tape or his traits to say that he couldn't, his rating could go up. He could be closer to what we talk about with Fred Warner and that type of deal. I already do come out and rank him as about a top 5 linebacker here, but there's certainly room with a larger sample size for me to view him even higher there. But I did put the yellow arrow on him as well, because sometimes this is a volatile position, and maybe he does take a little bit of a step back and is more of a top 10 to 15 linebacker in the league. I think this year, that yellow arrow is basically there to say this is going to be a big year to find out really who Zach Bond is in a larger sample size. But you're obviously excited to have him, and based on the tape, the floor is still tremendously high with him as your LB1. And it's in both phases, too. He's got the size, tenacity, instincts to defend the run, and he moves so well in space. He's got ball skills. He's an excellent coverage player. So love Zach Bond. So fun to see him do what he did last year. And the Eagles obviously did not mess around. They followed it up and made him one of the highest paid linebackers in the league. So they obviously believe that this might just be the beginning for Zach Bond. But then you have a lot more uncertainty with how these guys are going to land with a rookie Jihad Campbell and a Kobe Dean with his injuries. So both different types of questions, but questions nonetheless. Now, Jihad Campbell, excellent pick for the Eagles. Really fun to see him healthy, ready to go. Again, like, teams really got to just stop overthinking things and letting the Eagles get these guys. Jalen Carter, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. I don't know how the Eagles keep finding these guys, but Jihad Campbell is the rare, like, true first-round linebacker prospect, which I'm a rookie linebacker hater. I think these guys typically take multiple years to really get up to full speed. I think, generally speaking, it's the mid-round linebackers that prove to be much better just players overall than first-round linebackers because they have to go out and earn it. And oftentimes you're reaching to justify a lot of linebackers as first-round prospects. That was not my take on Jihad Campbell. He is closer to what I would have said about like Roquan Smith or Micah Parsons or even a Tremaine Edmonds where, look, if you have a guy that has these types of traits that are genuinely like they'll only come around once every 2 or 3 drafts, that's worth taking at linebacker, especially with the 31st pick. Now, I will say, like, I don't think he's perfect. I think his run diagnostics were frankly poor. He blitzed a lot of times. Linemen were able to climb to the second level and square him up before he kind of sees what's going on and gets to the right place in the right time. As athletic as he is, you have to pair that with the mental. As we've seen with a lot of really athletic linebackers that do get drafted in the first round, I think he can get there. I think it's more of a matter of when, not if. But I also think in terms of taking on blocks, he has the size to play with better stack, peek, shed technique that you teach these NFL linebackers to play with. Whereas at Alabama, he basically was always trying to out-athlete blockers coming up on him and, you know, dipping around guys, Euro-stepping around blocks. And, all right, if you're undersized and don't have the play strength, some guys have to get by doing that, but you don't have to do that if you're Jihad Campbell. You want to see him emerge as an elite, consistent run defender and have the proper technique there. And then just in terms of coverage, like, I'm just telling you right now, unless it was man-to-man where he was an elite college prospect as a coverage defender, love that side of things. It raises his floor as a coverage player. But you're going to be hard-pressed to find linebacker tape of a guy that has less of an idea of what he's looking for. Just kind of basically stared at the QB and read and react to his eyes. Didn't really have any sense of what was developing around him, where to flow in traffic. All that stuff needs to be developed. I think Jihad Campbell got a lot of hype, and a lot of that hype was justified, but I think the conversation of like that he's going to just step in and be amazing right away, he might. Sometimes it happens. I didn't think Edgerrin Cooper was going to be as good as he was last year, and there's a lot of Edgerrin Cooper in Jihad Campbell's game. And honestly, I think Jihad Campbell can thank Edgerrin Cooper because until him, it had been a really rough stretch of highly drafted linebackers actually being good right away. There's a chance where that happens, and that's why the up arrow is there. That's why this is a wild card. It's really just like how quickly does he take on the development and stuff that we've talked about here. If it takes a little bit more time, it might be year 2, year 3 where we really see him emerge as one of the best linebackers in the league. But there is not a linebacker duo in the league with more upside than these two guys, and it's going to be really fun to see this one way or another. And by the way, he's an excellent blitz threat as well. And I would also be fascinated as we kind of transition this to inviting Nakobe Dean potentially back into this room. I do wonder if, like, depending how good Jihad Campbell plays right away, if they put Nakobe Dean back out there as their LB2, like I said, they play in base nickel 80% of the time. Do they actually want to maybe just see if the Micah Parsons thing would work with Jihad Campbell? There was a lot of talk about him maybe playing some edge. He even stuck around at the combine and did pass rushing drills. I still think his projection is best as a linebacker, but that's at least worth mentioning here. We had kind of an out there take with Zach Bond last year. Like, okay, what if they kind of discover that almost by accident where Nakobe Dean comes back as the starter? We talked about that edge 2 spot as a question mark. All right, what if Campbell struggles a little bit as a linebacker? If Jalix Hunt isn't great off the edge as their number 2 guy, they want to put Nakobe Dean back in the starting lineup. They put Jahad Campbell off the edge, and then he never looks back, kind of like what happened with Dallas and Micah Parsons. Micah was probably a little bit more athletic than Jahad Campbell, but it's like slightly higher on the needle. There's a lot of those traits in there with him as well, and we know this team likes their undersized edge guys, so he's just an absurd football player to drop into the mix here. Very excited to see where this goes with him one way or another. But let's talk about Nakobe Dean. He's recovering from a patellar tendon injury, which is a very serious injury. There's a chance that he's just not available all year, and then he kind of hits the open market, and they say goodbye. Thank you for a great season last year, and that becomes a fascinating story there. But I think they're cautiously optimistic with his recovery. He's just on the PUP list, so he's going to have to miss at least the first 4 weeks. It's obviously kind of a wild card in the sense of when does he come back and how healthy is he when he does. But look, he was the perfect number 2 to Zach Bond last year. A little bit smaller, but also just excellent in coverage as, you don't want 2 undersized linebackers, but having one's not the end of the world, especially with Nakobe Dean, who can navigate blocks and get involved in the trenches. Like, he was just really good overall. Kind of got overshadowed by Zach Bond as the year went on, but yeah, I love the idea of him returning healthy. Campbell gets some experience early on, and then he maybe takes a back seat and gets ready for 2026, where he could really take that leap forward. That could be a really healthy setup there. And again, that's if the edge thing doesn't happen. So it's an awesome trio there. Only 2 of these guys are really going to play at once unless they get into a big rotation with these guys. And then they have some kind of interesting backups as well. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., not the most traitsy prospect, but I thought he showed some solid play when he did play last year. I don't necessarily project him as someone that's going to break through as a starter or anything like that. Just not the fastest guy, not the biggest guy. I see him as, and always did kind of see him as just a solid backup. I think you like that with where he's at on this depth chart. And then Smile Mondin Jr., I mean, it's just as a special teamer, honestly. Like, he is going to be insane for this team. Just so much speed. All he really did was play kind of half safety, weak side linebacker, like kind of that star player, the star role on that Georgia defense as kind of just a big nickel player. But he runs and tackles, and he runs very fast, and he loves to hit, and he's super physical. Special teams, ace, 100%. And then getting to learn the linebacker position in a way that he didn't really play at Georgia is fascinating to me as well. So I like that pick to fill out the back end of your roster as well. Really hard to imagine a different type of archetype that I would want covering kicks and punts and stuff. So there's your group of linebackers. And then we'll go to the secondary here where they are seeing some pretty substantial change on the back end of this defense as well. So at cornerback, losing one core starter there, Darius Slay is going to stay in state, go play for the Steelers. The ageless wonder there had a very good playoff run last year, so that's a loss. And then Isaiah Rodgers, who probably would have been a bigger impact on this team if they needed him to be, but he was pretty solid in a third of his starts. He gets a starting cornerback contract with the Vikings. And then Avonte Maddox as well on the way out. And then, more like minor additions at cornerback. Adoree Jackson is a Band-Aid veteran signing. They did go get Jacorian Bennett. I think that's an exciting trade. Stole value there, flipping, a super unproven backup DT for a promising young corner in Jacorian Bennett. Howie Roseman just keeps getting away with it. And then they also spent a fifth-round pick on Mac McWilliams. I did say downgraded at corner because Darius Slay was still pretty good last year, even though nobody talked about him because, he was like the 8th best player on their defense. That's just how insane the unit was last year. But then downgraded as well at safety. They cut ties with CJ Gardner-Johnson. I don't think this is a devastating loss or anything like that, but he did play very well for them last year. And the reason I'm not too worried about this, and I just say slightly downgraded there, is that they really do feel confident in the guys they have to replace him, I think. They understand that safety is probably the easiest defensive position to kind of develop guys and have guys fill in. And I think as probably the most brilliant team in the league in terms of cap management, they looked ahead and understood what that extra cap flexibility this year and into the future was going to do for them. So they ship him off basically to Houston for a dart throw on Kenyon Green, basically a salary dump. I don't think they do that if Vic Fangio isn't super confident in a Sidney Brown to step up, as we'll talk about. It is a downgrade on paper that opens up some question marks at safety, but I do understand why they did it. I know a lot of people were like, man, this guy's got a lot of picks, and I don't really get why they do that. Gardner Johnson's not like a perfect safety either. So anyway, they lose him. That's a downgrade, but they did also turn around and draft Andrew Makuba in the second round, another talented safety into the mix there. And they did bring Marcus Epps back there. So it's not like they have nothing to work with in this safety room as we talk about. But yeah, slightly downgraded there at safety, in my opinion, and fully downgraded at cornerback. But even despite the downgrades, this still comes out as a top half secondary in the league. They rank in that tier 10th to 15th for secondary for me. And yet again, same exact narrative with those first two position groups on the defense, a wild card for me. Not that I think this unit has super high downside to be much worse than we have them ranked, but 4 out of 5 starters here that I put the up arrow on, that if they hit their green lights here as well, you're talking about probably a top 5 secondary or so. And the biggest of which are going to be your top 2 corners there, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. Literally, I don't have a bad thing to say about this duo, traits-wise and on paper, and as far as what you've invested in these guys. They have the upside and projection to settle in as one of the best cornerback duos in the entire NFL. And frankly, for the second half of the year last year, they played like it. It's just, this is a volatile position, and I need to see more than a year in Quinyon Mitchell's case and not even a full year in Cooper DeJean's case before I rank them as such, hence the up arrows. But dude, Quinyon Mitchell always did have remarkable traits, was one of the best defensive players in that draft class. The fact that he was available in the 20s of last year's draft was mind-boggling. And the Eagles just laughed there, not way up to the podium, but they were certainly laughing when they sent that card in, getting to select Quinyon Mitchell where they did. Had so much to love as a prospect: man coverage, zone coverage, size, tackling, athleticism, you name it. And that all was on display, where he was an immediate impact for this secondary and really played at like a Pro Bowl level or so. I don't know if he ended up getting voted in or not. I don't really follow the Pro Bowl. But then, yeah, Cooper DeJean, we've already kind of talked about the impact he makes a little bit with this scheme and his presence as a nickel corner. I always liked him most in that role. In fact, this was a big draft analysis victory lap for me. Not that I liked Cooper DeJean. Everybody liked Cooper DeJean, and everybody thought it was a steal in the second round. Nobody understood that. But a draft victory lap in terms of the deeper analysis with the pro comp. I called him Diet Jalen Ramsey in the sense that there was a debate. Is he an outside corner? Is he a safety? I said, put him in a Vic Fangio defense. More talking about the fact that there's all those spread out throughout the league right now, not literally for Vic Fangio, which is even more perfect. And have him play that big nickel star role that Jalen Ramsey played in that version of Brandon Staley's defense with the Rams. And that's exactly what happened. The second he was healthy, they put him in the nickel, and he was arguably the best nickel corner in the league. He has, as a young player, a brilliant mind. He had awesome zone IQ at Iowa, a system where they coach these guys, all of the ins and outs of secondary play in that really defensive machine in that Iowa program. So that was no doubt. But the way he plays the run, his physicality, and such a great athlete in terms of burst and speed. Maybe not the most fluid, oily hips to step outside and be an outside corner, not the experience to be a free safety. No, I loved him as that slot corner in a zone-heavy Fangio defense. It's exactly where he lands. No surprise that they get the most out of him early in his career, and he is headed for big, big things. So again, I don't have any questions about these guys. It's just, I'm not going to come out and put superstar rankings on these guys quite yet. Though, gun to my head, I would say, yeah, we're probably talking about these guys ranking out more in that range by season's end. Now, you do actually have some other question marks beyond that. Your CB3 spot is very much up in the air. With Darius Slay leaving, they're going to have to figure this thing out. They're going to start with Keely Ringo. There's reason to believe with him kind of winning this job that there's potential there. I'm much more iffy on him In fact, of all the starting players we've talked about that I would like bet loses the job, whether it's Jalix Hunt or Tyler Steen at right guard, Jalen Hurts losing the job to Tanner McKee. Ooh, do I keep that in the video? Let's keep it. All the Eagles fans that don't want to hear that left already anyway. And yes, I'm kidding. But Keely Ringo's the guy that, like, I thought he was super overrated as a prospect. Hasn't really played great here in Philadelphia. He's shown some flashes. Like, he's exciting because he's tall, fast, and played at Georgia. Well, yeah, that was Eric Stokes too. And Eric Stokes just isn't that good. And frankly, Keely Ringo's worse than Eric Stokes. I just see a super stiff guy that didn't have the requisite anticipation to play in a zone-heavy system, too, like this. So I don't know. We'll see. I did put the up arrow on him just to kind of give him credit for winning this job. Like, this infrastructure, like, everybody seems to hit green lights on this Eagles team. So I think he could at least be a solid player, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just struggles and then you're talking about, like, going to your depth, which this is just like, dude, Howie Roseman and the Eagles are so fucking good at this. How many teams are like, oh, well, Keely Ringo will work out, so we're just fine. We'll just fill in like replacement level cornerbacks and not go out and try to find options there. Well, not Howie Roseman. He understands that not everything is going to work out. So he goes and signs Adoree Jackson that I think, yeah, like he still has a CB3 in the confines of this defense. Like, he can still absolutely step in and play okay. I don't think he was a huge problem for the Giants last year. I think as a floor raiser, if Keely Ringo sucks, that's a good signing. And then even beyond that, they go get Jacorian Bennett. They get wind that he might... They see all these reports that for one reason or another, that new staff with the Raiders is not giving him playing time. His agent probably put it out there that he's unhappy. They probably made a phone call and were like, can we throw you a backup DT for him if you're going to cut him? And the Raiders are like, yeah, sure. We'll throw this valuable asset away. No problem. Look, Jacorian Bennett has looked awesome in the preseason, showed a lot of flashes last year. The growth he showed from what he was as a prospect to struggling in year one with the Raiders to playing pretty solid last year, though streaky. I mean, this dude's got speed. I think he's got ball skills. A lot to like there. You want to see him, tackle better, which was a big issue for him. But, man, if Keely Ringo doesn't work out, you've got really good options there. It's more of a question of, like, who's going to settle in there, how good they're going to be, and when that happens, as opposed to, like, whether or not they're going to just have a tragic CB3 situation. I think they've set themselves up that eventually they'll figure it out. It just might take some time. And then Mac McWilliams as well, a fifth-round pick, kind of played that off-zone style at UCF. An interesting fifth-round pick as well, so that's another dart throw in there. But then you go to your safety room, and it's a fine unit. Reed Blankenship's a very good safety. I like his ball skills. He's a solid run defender. I don't have too much to say about him, but he's a very good, solid starter on the back end. And then Sidney Brown is, I think, the bet that they're making here. Super athletic, third-round pick, really fun player. He's got a lot of girth to his game. He can take on blocks. He can hit. He's got speed and range on the back end. Now with multiple years learning, Vic's system last year, but it's always kind of been roughly the same system here, depending who the coordinator actually is. Jonathan Gannon was a Fangio guy, for example. And I think Brown is ready to take over as the starting safety here, and I would fully expect that he's going to play well. It's just we haven't seen too much of him, and he's been a little bit more streaky when he has been out there, but certainly expecting him to settle in as a very nice player, and honestly, if he plays as good as Chauncey Gardner-Johnson did last year, that should be far from the most surprising thing on this Eagles roster. But then they also draft Andrew Makuba in the second round. Very talented player. Love his coverage ability, speed, ball skills, zone IQ, risk management. I don't know exactly where he fits because he's not a good run defender at all, and there's definitely room for him to improve that, but he's very slender, so we'll see if he actually becomes like a starting safety here. I don't think that they necessarily need that with Blankenship and Sidney Brown. I think it is a good hedge against Sidney Brown in case Brown doesn't work out. But also, like, as a dime back, if they want to run even more dime here, where you're putting 6 defensive backs out there, they hardly did it last year. They only ran dime 4.2% of the time. But with his playmaking skills over the middle of the field, he could be a game changer in kind of that PJ Williams-esque role where you're not even really asking him to play sound zone or be a safety or be a corner. It's just lurk in the middle of the field, read out routes, read out the QB, and go get us a pick. Like, I love him in that role. Right now, they have time, though, to just kind of see what they have there, see if maybe he could bulk up or become a little bit more of a consistent tackler and that kind of stuff. And then they did bring Marcus Epps back here as well after some time with the Raiders. He's on the practice squad for now, but they might make room for him if they get an injury or a spot opens up as just depth. I mean, they really only have 3 safeties on the roster right now. But there is your last position group breakdown for this very interesting Eagles defense that does have a lot of like young players that they're asking to step up, some kind of question marks in terms of just how potent is this defensive roster and this defense going to be. But the fact that you have youth and question marks at all 3 levels, and I still rank this defense where we rank all these units and position groups about as close to their floor as you can imagine. I still have the Eagles as the second best defense in the league, all the way down from being the best defense as they were at the end of last year. Needless to say, though, like with all the opportunities for them to hit green lights with these talented players, they could not just get back to where they were last year, which was a legitimate championship caliber defense. They could be even better if they hit all the green lights. As amazing as this team is at developing guys, it's still unlikely that all these guys hit, but it's kind of like, you know, I think everybody has that route to a certain store where you have to go through like 11 stoplights and the drive could take either 4 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on how lucky you get. If the Eagles hit all those green lights, this is going to be an absurd defense with the potential they have at all 3 levels. There is one note there, just before we flip this over to the special teams conversation. For those that have followed the series, Houston did come in as my second-ranked defense when we did their deep dive. Just as things tend to happen with this series, especially some later in the series like this Eagles team, I put the rankings together in May. I think I originally had the Eagles DB grade a little bit too high with some of the question marks that they do have there, so I lowered their DB grade 1 tier there, and that lowered the Eagles' overall defense from first to second there. So there's your context there. The Texans now rank as my number 1 defense, and I will remind you guys, when that Ravens deep dive drops, you will find on my Patreon for free the full spreadsheet, so you can track the final official rankings as we have made some of these more subtle tweaks and adjustments throughout the course of the series. But yeah, let's talk some special teams. No change there. They did originally lose Britton Covey, who did some returning for them last year, but he's back on the practice squad. So they're running it back with pretty much the same unit. We'll see if Covey ends up on the 53 to do some punt returning. But yeah, they came out as my 22nd ranked special teams. This is probably the closest thing to a weakness that the Eagles have. Jake Elliott actually missed 9 kicks last year. Braden Mann doesn't grade out as a particularly high-end punter. The returners are fine. I'm not worried about it, but like Will Shipley's pretty unproven there. Cooper DeJean has juice, but he did muff 2 punts last year. If Britton Covey was back on this squad, you can trust him a little bit more. It's not a special teams that I'm worried about, but as far as the splits in the rankings, they didn't come out particularly high. Again, 22nd there for special teams. But before we get into the schedule and my win total expectations for the Eagles, let's summarize what we've discussed to this point. And we will take a look at our handy-dandy Venn diagram where we look at strengths, weaknesses, and recap those pivotal wild cards. The Eagles have a ridiculous layout here. The amount of strengths that this team has is unparalleled, and hence that's why they come in as our number 1 ranked team. But just go down the list, man. Running back, pass catchers, offensive line, the impact they get from the quarterback with the math-changing run game impact. Defensive line, linebackers, defensive coaching. Forget about it. It's basically the whole damn team there. And then to make things even worse, or better, depending on who you're asking, I guess, weaknesses, I got nothing. What's the weakness on this team? Like, right guard, maybe, but we like Tyler Steen. CB3, maybe, but like we said, they're set up pretty well to at least find somebody adequate out of that collection of guys. And then it's like, look, I'm hard on Jalen Hurts, but he's still a good passer. Is LB2 a weakness with Jahad Campbell as your LB2? Like, I think he might have some issues early on, but it's not like linebacker's a weakness next to Zach Bond. They got nothing. Like, kicker, I guess, like maybe. But Jake Elliott's been really good in years past. Howie Roseman is just on a different plane of existence. And then you look at the pivotal factors, and we've already talked about some of this, but like, yeah, right guard is a pivotal factor in the sense that if Tyler Steen hits, that offensive line is going to be even more absurd. They might have some issues sometimes if he sucks, but it's not like the offensive line is going to end up being a weakness. Same thing with the secondary in that CB3 spot. And then the other two items listed with the wild cards are also listed as strengths. Like the D-line and linebackers are already strengths, but there's crazy upside for those to be like the best units in the league at those position groups if things go right. The one main wild card I can genuinely think of that maybe could end up showing in the weaknesses category for the Eagles would be the offensive play calling, which is not a roster-related issue, but we did see that be an issue in 2023. I'm more optimistic that things are going to transition fine there, but I guess if you had to make me pick anything that could hold this team back a little bit, maybe it would be the coaching and the scheming side of things, because that was really the last thing that we did see for something to go awry with this ridiculous Eagles roster. So crazy, crazy Eagles team. Number one in the power rankings for good reason. Super Bowl champions for good reason. But let's take a look at their schedule, what that could mean for their win total this year. So their Vegas over-under, as you would expect, is 11.5, which is quite high. But their schedule is not necessarily easy. We know these NFC East teams have a challenging schedule. We've discussed that with especially the Giants and Commanders, and that's no different with the Eagles. Now, they're the best team in the league, so they're going to be favored pretty much every week anyway. But they do actually have a couple games where they're underdogs for me, at Kansas City week 2 and at Buffalo. So they drew some tough road games there. I think ideally you would get those guys in your house. And then they have to play the NFC North, which is an excellent division. And they play the AFC West, which is one of the better divisions in the league, having to play, you know, not just the Chiefs, but Denver and the Chargers. So they have tough opponents on the schedule. But even then, they did get a little bit lucky here because they did get, even though they have to go to Kansas City, they caught Kansas City when they still have that Rashee Rice suspension. And then Tampa Bay week 4, we will see if Tristan Wirfs is ready by then, but there's a chance Tristan Wirfs isn't ready to go in what is one of their harder games on the schedule at Tampa. But I still like the over for this team. I do. I think they're that good that even if the schedule's harder than average, I think it's going to, like, I don't think it's going to phase them that much. You're really counting on injuries to slow this Eagles team down, which isn't uncommon for our number one ranked team in these power rankings, but it applies even more to the Eagles. Like, this is just an insane collection of talent. So that is going to do it. I wish we could sit here and say we're done with the series and celebrate another amazing year of deep dives, but I am going to have to come back on Friday after the season has officially started with our Ravens deep dive, and then we can get sentimental. We still have a little bit more work to do here, but thank you so much for watching. Enjoy Thursday Night Football with this Eagles team. I hope this video got you nice and prepped for, I guess, tomorrow or tonight's matchup, depending on when you're watching this. But I really appreciate you for watching. I will have a quick predictions show tomorrow as well, just to kind of lay it all on the line with where I think everything actually plays out this year, giving it my best shot at that. And then, yeah, Ravens Deep Dive Friday. But peace out. We'll see you guys soon.